This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
Now from a distance, my abandoned E46 M3 doesn't actually look too bad. But once we start to get a little closer, well, we can see a lot of wear and tear. And well, it does need a fair amount of work.
I've done this before, you fall. I won't catch you, don't know I'm stalling.
But the reason I bought the M3 is 1, they're going up in value, 2, this is the Laguna Blue, and 3, it's a manual. It is highly desirable.
Now every single part of me wants to modify this car and turn it into an absolute beast, but I know it's going to be better for all of us if we do more of an OEM plus restoration on this thing.
Now, I bought this M3 for £9,500 from a track experience company. So pretty much about half of its life has been spent being thrashed around the track by someone who's paid for an experience day. Now, I know being thrashed around the track sounds like a bad thing, but it might actually turn out to be quite a good thing later on in the video. And well, I'll tell you why. But what they have managed to find is some service history, a spare key, and we've seen that it's got 8 previous owners, which isn't uncommon for a 2002 BMW M3. But the main reason why this E46 was abandoned or taken off the road or track was because where the subframe mounts to the boot floor, there's a crack in the boot floor. It's a really common problem on this E46, and it's something that we're going to get to. Now, after installing a new battery in the last video, all of the warning lights on the dash seem to have disappeared. I love it when a car fixes itself. The only thing we've got left is a brake pad warning light and some warning lights for some bulbs and lights. There is no fluid in the power steering, and that's because it's leaking from the actual rack itself. So we need to replace the power steering rack along with so many other things. So I'm going to get stripping apart this E46 M3 and we'll see what we find. Okay, first to come off are these battered alloy wheels with the racing slicks on. Safe to say they won't be going back on the car. And even though the brake pad light's on the dash, the brake pads have quite a lot of life left, so I can assume it's going to be more of a sensor issue. It's missing a brake pad retainer clip on the caliper, and the brake lines have even been done. Okay, so in this box right here is the connectors for the brake pads, which goes into the brake pad sensor, and they've just been fused together. That obviously doesn't work. We're going to need to get a sensor which plugs into this and then goes into the brake pads. This is just a complete mess, and down here I've found even more wires which I have no idea where to go to. Plan now is a thing. I'm pretty much just going to strip the whole front end off this and start from scratch and then work away backwards. So let's do this. So it's worth mentioning, in the previous video I did do a service on this thing, and I used the oil 5W30 fully synthetic, which a lot of you guys told me was wrong, and a lot of BMW guys told me it is wrong. So I've since changed that to 10W60, but you'll find out later in the video why I have to remove that again. Now, removing the front bumper on this thing was quite strange. There was literally no bolts for it. It just unclipped, and well, this felt nice. But sure enough, I carried on with a headache. Now I'm just going to strip the whole front end off the car. It's just going to be easier to access the engine, inspect anything else that might be wrong, clean anything up, and also there's an aircon belt which is missing on the front as well. Now, as I was stripping it apart, I noticed there was a lot of non-OEM bolts, which obviously I'm going to replace for OEM bolts, just to make it look all original and nice. Now, with the front panel and crash bar out the way, the next thing in the way is the radiator. So we've got to disconnect the aircon lines, the top and bottom radiator hoses, some oil cooler lines, and the power steering cooler lines as well.
I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no. Oh, I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no.
Once everything was disconnected from the radiator, it should literally just pull and wiggle out. And eventually it did.
I can't say these cause my last name ain't Ken. Cooking on the stove, that's the way he paid the rent. Working on the pole, that's the way she pays tuition. Better watch your soul, cause you know they trying to get it.
Okay, so we're a few hours in and we've not fixed anything. If anything, we've gone backwards.
But sometimes you do have to go backwards in order to move forward. And working on old cars like this is actually pretty easy.
So easy, in fact, it actually reminded me of the time that I built a website using Squarespace, who have sponsored today's video. From websites to online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build and run your business. Let's say, for example, this air conditioning belt is a website that you built using Squarespace, and this air conditioning pump is your business. Now, if you combine this with this, you should be able to create something amazing. That's true, and just check how easy it actually is to build a website using Squarespace. So there's hundreds of templates to choose from on Squarespace to start your website. I'm going to start with this one. Once you've got your template, you can then go in and pretty much edit anything. You can drag and drop your own photos in there, edit text, remove text, and add your own logos in there as well. And before you know it, the website is beginning to look like your own. So when you need a website, go to squarespace.com or click the link in the description box below, and when you're ready to launch, use code Matt Armstrong, and that's going to get you 10% off your first website or domain name. Right, let's get this aircon belt on the aircon pump. Now, the only reason I can think there's no aircon belt on the aircon pump is because it was a track car and it doesn't need aircon, and the belt probably came off or broke and they never replaced it. Now, once the belt was on, which was easy enough done, it was time to inspect underneath. And what a disaster that was. There's clearly a huge oil leak coming from somewhere on this engine, and as I mentioned previously, we're probably going to have to drop the new oil that I put into the car, because what I've heard is really common to go on these E46 M3s are the rod bearings, the bottom end bearings. Okay, I just cannot stand oil leaks, especially ones that have been there since the dawn of day, and they cause the whole underside of the car just to look so filthy, and that's exactly what's happening here.
So yes, I did do another oil change, but it looks as if all that 10W60 is going to have to come out again anyway if we're going to do the bottom end bearings. And also, it looks as if we've got a pretty bad oil leak coming from the sump, this sort of weird plate here, and it probably looks like the sump plug could do with a new washer, because that is soaking wet, full of oil. It looks like it's gone back onto the gearbox here as well. I don't actually think the gearbox is leaking any oil. Okay, so this power steering rack is actually leaking from the inside here. The seals are absolutely gone, and there's just fluid building up in the boots here and well, all in here. So that's the main concern at the minute. I want to get that changed because, well, it seems like we've got barely any power steering in the car. It's making the power steering pump work like anything. That's a main concern, but then we'll get onto the other stuff, which, well, there's plenty of. So let's get this power steering off first.
Now, to remove the power steering rack, I'm going to disconnect it from the inner tie rods. Hopefully that doesn't distort any tracking that has been done to this car, as I'm sure that was kept on top of with it being a track car. Then there's two hydraulic lines on the top of the power steering, which I assume one is for feed and one is return. Once those are disconnected, I've got to disconnect the rack from the steering column, which is just one bolt, which you can just about see here. Then the last and final thing is two nut and bolts, which actually hold it to the subframe. Now, I actually really struggled to get these bolts out because when you push them up to release the rack, it started hitting the engine. So we needed to lift the engine up to get those bolts out. And in comes the trusty engine brace. This engine brace will sit on both sides of the chassis and will allow me to hold the engine up and even move it up a tiny bit. Once I pull the engine up and it's supported by the brace, I can then move the car back in the air, and then I'm going to start undoing the mounts for the anti-roll bar, and then start undoing the bolts for the subframe. We actually have to drop the subframe down if we're going to do the rod bearings anyway. Another common problem on these M3s are the lower engine mounts. As you can see here, they're pretty perished and, well, definitely need replacing whilst we're taking the subframe down. Just got to disconnect the bolts from the wishbone and then the remaining bolts from the subframe, which one I actually really struggled on and it was suspiciously tight. But despite that really tight bolt on the subframe, which I actually left for later, I was still able to wiggle out the steering rack. And when the steering rack finally came out, it was a massive relief. Yes! And finally, the power steering rack is off. This messy old thing is, well, it's absolutely rubbish. It's at least off now, but whilst we're here, we might as well lower the subframe down because there's a few jobs we can do whilst we're there, but we can't quite lower the subframe yet. I want you guys to be here for this moment.
The only thing holding the subframe on is this bolt here. There's another bolt at the back. There's this front bolt and the rear bolt there. I've undone all of them. All of them are loose apart from that one there, which I was ugga-duggering it for such a long time. And I just feel like that bolt is bad news. And if it snaps in there, that holds the whole subframe. And well, that could be, there could be some big issues if that snaps off. This could decide whether we're going to be dropping the sump and doing the big end bearings, or we're just going to be completely, well, going from square one.
Big ugga dugga.
Big ugga dugga coming in. Phil's coming in with this one because our damn tension is built.
What is worried?
The ugga dugga does it. Why is there so much oil on it? Yes! No messing around. Okay, look at the state of the E46. We've well and truly gone backwards, but in order to move forward. Now the subframe is completely down now and it's swinging and it's being held in from the top mounts of the suspension. That's the only thing holding the subframe in, but it is safe just to hang there. Now the reason we've done this is so we can access the sump, which is here. It's a pretty big sump, but now we can access all the bolts because we need to drop this down because then we can get to the big end bearings, which are apparently quite common to fail on this car. And they just fail without no reason. There's no sort of signs that they're going to fail. So we might as well drop them and check them whilst we're there.
And also, we might actually get to fix something right now. So here's the sump, and although it does look like it's seeping out oil from here or where it actually meets the bell housing for the gearbox, it's actually pretty wet up the side of the engine up there. If you can just see, really difficult to get the camera in. It's really wet, and that oil is trickling down here, down the side of the sump,
and then it almost looks as if your sump gasket is leaking, or it can look like the sump bung's leaking.
Now again, really common on these E46 M3s, from what I've been learning on YouTube, there's a little bung in the side of the engine which is removed with like a flathead screwdriver, and it has an O-ring on it. And obviously because the engine gets hot and cold, that rubber O-ring becomes really hard, and well, it starts to leak oil over time. I'm going to try and get at it with a ratchet now, remove that, then we can replace the O-ring on it before dropping this sump and seeing what sort of damage it is done to those big end bearings, and have we sort of missed a big accident here. So as you can see, I've already removed this sort of bung, I'm not sure what it's called, from the side of the engine. Now I've just got to get the O-ring off it. Once the O-ring was off, which was completely knackered, I could then put a fresh O-ring on. With the fresh O-ring on, I could then wind it back into the car, and hopefully that stops the oil leak from the top of the car. Get in, we've finally fixed something. Now onto the big thing, the big moment, the bottom end bearings. So for those that don't know, the bottom end bearings are the bearings that sit on the bottom of the conrod and then go around the crankshaft. These undergo a lot of heat and a lot of friction. Now on the majority of most cars, you would never need to replace these. But on the E46, it seems to be a really common problem. Now on my M3, I can see on the service history that it has had a recall for these rod bearings. But this was done at 18,000 miles. It's now done at 100,000 miles more. So I think it's time to inspect them. Rod bearings tend to wear if you don't warm the car up properly before driving it. So people who just start the car and nip to the shops and back could be doing a lot more damage than people who drive it around the track for the whole day. Hence why I mentioned earlier that it might not be that bad that it's been thrashed around the track. Now after taking the millions of bolts out which hold the sump on, we can now almost gain access to the bottom end bearings. But we need to remove this oil pump first. This oil pump is not timed, so it's okay just to remove it and let it hang.
Okay, so here we go, the point of no return. This has got well out of hand, let's be honest. So, we've got the sump off, the oil pump off as well, and now we can get to the bottom end. Here's the crank, and this is the bottom of the conrods here. So these two bolts would actually pull the bottom of the conrods off, and we can get to the big end bearings, and we can see that the damage, well, if any, of the bottom end bearings.
So the bottom end bearings, or the rod bearings, are obviously on the bottom of the conrods attached to the crank. Now, because these have a lot of heat going through them, they tend to wear out, and when they look worn, I'll put a picture on the screen now of what they look like worn. There is literally no sort of warning of them going, and if they do go, it can cause catastrophic engine failure.
Now what I'm going to do, I can turn the crank over using this bolt here. I haven't removed the spark plug, so we're going to be fighting against the compression of the engine to turn it off. Probably not the cleverest ideas, but I'm still going to give it a go. But what we can see here is the bolts for this one. It's quite easy to get to. I can undo this too. Push the conrod up, which should allow me to get it out here, and then we can turn it over and do the others. But I'm going to do one by one,
because I've never done this before, and I've just learnt this through watching 101 videos on YouTube, and there's probably loads of things I'm going to do wrong, but if I do get this wrong, I could destroy the whole engine, and just think all that effort of putting that all together, the last thing I want to do is take it all apart again to strip the engine out or something like that. So, well, let's take the first big end bearing out and let's see how badly damaged this 122,000 mile E46 M3 is. Let's do it. So there is literally just 2 more bolts to undo, and then we're on the final straight of putting the whole thing back together. And supposedly by doing all these big jobs, it increases the value of the M3. But when they find out I've done the jobs, it may go back down. After all that, the 122,000 mile rod bearings are really not that bad, although I've only got one out so far. Okay, so here we go. Here is the bottom of the con rod, which I think actually tends to be the worst, but this is not actually too bad. Here's the bearing in the middle. It's not actually too bad. Looks sort of all the same color. These only go one way round. I know which way round they go due to the numbers on the side. And then here is the one that's came off the top. And that, well, it has worn away a fair bit and it's gone nearly down to the copper. So it's probably good that we are changing this, and we have got some new bearings here. This is probably one of the most technical videos that I've ever done, and if you've been fooled that you think I look like I know what I'm doing, well, I clearly don't, and I really hope that this goes back together the way it should, because this engine sounded pretty good to start with. But this is where we run into some issues. So here are the new bearings. I can put them in no problem, and here are the new ARP bolts. These are all upgraded stuff, uprated, so hopefully we don't ever have to do this job again. Well, we won't. But the problem is there's 2 types of bolts. These are the M10 bolts, which are apparently for 2003 and later, and guess what? Yes, I bought the wrong bolts. But what I'll do now is I'll put the new bearings in this con rod. That's as far as I can get to at the minute, and then we're just gonna have to go and search around for some M11 ARP rod bolts. And if you guys have got any of these, or you know anyone that has, let me know in the comment section below. Now, the actual part of actually replacing the rod bearings is one of the easiest parts of the job. They simply just push out. We need to make sure the surface is nice and clean using brake cleaner, and then we can carefully push in, being careful not to score anything, with the fresh new rod bearings. And I'm going to apply some assembly lube just to make sure when we first start the car it's not running dry for those first couple of seconds before the oil gets to it. Now, the top half of the rod bearing obviously has to be done on the car because it's still on the car, but it's exactly the same concept. Rod bearing pushes in, bit of assembly lube, and then we can slide it back onto the crankshaft. For now, obviously we don't have the bolts, so I'm just going to slide in the old bolts just to hold it there until we get the new ones. Oh my god, literally what a day. I've never done big end bearings or anything before. We've got one on number 6, but obviously we've not got the bolts on as of yet. I need to make sure I can get some bolts because I don't want this E46 in this ramp for much longer because, oh well, I'll simply forget how the whole thing goes back together. But I can't tell you guys enough how much I've been stressing about doing that job and whether I should do it or not. And I guess the big moment will be when we get it all back together and whether it starts and runs okay. God knows. I really hope that it does, but I guess we won't know until I put the thing back together. Hey, but at least now we're on the sort of fixing home run. Everything we do to this front end from now on, we'll be putting it back together and, well, fixing everything as we go along. So we're sort of on the fixing stage. We're on the home run. As for the rear of the car and the subframe, well, that is all to come. I wanted a project and I guess, well, I've got a project here. Now, it's kind of frustrating for me because I really like to finish the jobs that I started in the same video, but I'm sure you guys would appreciate how much work and effort has to go into this to make it all work in one video. And that's the reason why I'm gonna have to leave this video here, but I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button, and thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.
Drug that I just can't deny.